Well, they finally did it. After 17 years of digital jabs, meme wars, and cheap little Instagram shots fired from the safety of a marble kitchen island, the two biggest personalities in this entire feud finally stepped into the same room. And what happened next is going to reshape the entire trajectory of hip-hop for the next decade. And listen, before we get into it, before I even open the door on this one, you need to understand something. This is not another rumor. This is not another blog headline dressed up like breaking news. This is one of those rare, radioactive moments where the culture cracks in half, and if you've been paying attention for the last 15 years, you already know exactly which two names I'm about to say. Because the truth is, the second these two men walked into the same terminal in Miami, hip-hop as we know it stopped being a music genre and became a full-blown crime drama. Now, before I even give you the play-by-play, I want you to sit with this. Curtis Jackson, better known to the world as 50 Cent, and William Leonard Roberts too, the man the streets crowned as Rick Ross, these two moguls have spent almost 2 decades pretending the internet was a battlefield. But yesterday, at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, inside a heavily secured VIP lounge at Miami International Airport, the internet stopped being enough. And what really went down behind that frosted glass, the shattered crystal, the flipped mahogany table, the federal document that fell out of a black leather designer bag, is going to make every Officer Ricky meme, every $40,000 troll transfer, every lawnmower joke look like a warm-up act for the main event. One part of the story is verified. Another part is being redacted in real time. And another part, the part I'm going to walk you through tonight, is the part somebody in a very expensive suit is right now trying to bury before you finish this video. So push this one up the algorithm before it disappears, because the next 15 minutes might be the most important 15 minutes in modern hip-hop reporting. Let me set the stage properly, because if you don't understand the runway, you won't understand the crash. The bad blood between 50 Cent and Rick Ross is not a beef. Beef is what rappers monetize for a summer. This is a decade and a half of psychological warfare that has been dressed up as entertainment and sold to us in installments. It started in 2008, in a hallway backstage at the BET Hip Hop Awards, when 50 Cent, sitting on top of a G-Unit empire that had swallowed pop culture whole, gave Rick Ross what witnesses described as a cold, dismissive glance. That glance detonated a war. Ross fired back with mafia music in early 2009, and 50 Cent responded not with a diss track, but with a scalpel. Within 48 hours, Curtis Jackson had pulled up official Florida Department of Corrections paperwork, plastered it across the internet, and revealed to the entire planet that the self-proclaimed drug lord Rick Ross had actually spent years working as a correctional officer inside a Florida prison. He tagged him Officer Ricky, and that nickname was engineered to bankrupt Ross's credibility for the rest of his life. But here's the part almost every commentator forgets. Rick Ross didn't die. He refused to die. He leaned harder into luxury, into opulence, into the mythology of the biggest boss. He built Maybach Music Group into a machine. He stacked platinum records with Meek Mill and Whale. He moved into a 109-room mansion in Georgia and called it the Promised Land. For a full decade, Ross weaponized wealth as a shield. He tried to prove, one gold chain at a time, that Curtis Jackson could expose the paperwork but never touch the empire. And yet, 50 Cent never let go of his throat. Not for a single day. The war just kept mutating. Diss tracks became physical brawls between entourages. Remember 2012, when G-Unit affiliates jumped Ross's man gunplay right at the BET Hip Hop Awards. Remember 2015, when Curtis Jackson was ordered to hand over $5 million to the mother of Ross's child after leaking a private tape, a financial hit so brutal it triggered his own Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing just 3 days later? Ross used that bankruptcy as ammunition for years, publicly claiming he had personally reviewed 50 Cent's bank ledgers during legal discovery and felt sorry for the man. And every single one of you watching thought that was the peak of the war. It wasn't. It was the appetizer. Because Curtis Jackson plays the long game like no one else in this industry. He rebuilt everything. He conquered television with the Power franchise. He locked down a Las Vegas residency. He opened a massive studio complex in Shreveport, Louisiana that pulled entire film productions out of Hollywood. And by the time we walked into 2026, the pendulum had swung again. 50 Cent launched what I can only describe as a surgical, high-frequency digital demolition of Rick Ross's billionaire image. He mocked Ross for being a special guest instead of a headliner on the Millennium Tour, implying Ross could no longer sell out a venue on his own. He turned Ross's own social media against him, launching the now legendary lawnmower campaign, publicly asking why a supposed ultra-wealthy mogul was filming himself cutting his own grass instead of hiring landscapers. And when viral photos surfaced of the biggest boss standing in a commercial boarding line at an airport, Curtis Jackson didn't just clown him. He took it nuclear. He publicly sent Rick Ross exactly $40,000, not as a peace offering, but as a devastating humiliation, publicly implying that the man who called himself a boss couldn't afford to keep his $35 million custom Gulfstream G550 in the sky. For months, that pressure kept building. The memes were relentless. The internet was laughing. And Rick Ross's pride was being chipped away, one algorithm cycle at a time, on a global stage. Every hip-hop journalist in America knew what most of you already sensed in your bones. These two men could not exist in the same room. The industry was holding its breath, waiting for the collision. But nobody, and I mean nobody, could have predicted that the collision would erupt inside a heavily secured VIP sanctuary at one of the busiest airports on Earth. And nobody could have predicted what would come tumbling out of a designer bag when it did. Now, here is where things get real. The date is July 16, 2026. The location is the ultra-exclusive Signature Flight Support VIP terminal at Miami International Airport. This is not a normal boarding lounge. This is a fortress for billionaires, foreign diplomats, and A-list celebrities. Soundproof glass. Premium leather. Private security patrolling every corridor. It exists for one reason, to guarantee that people with too much to lose never have to be seen. And according to an airport insider who witnessed everything and has since spoken under conditions of extreme secrecy, Rick Ross walked through those doors at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. He was scheduled to fly to Colombia on his newly upgraded custom private jet, which he had just fitted with a $500,000 Starlink satellite Wi-Fi system. He was flanked by 3 of his largest personal bodyguards. He was draped head to toe in a bright yellow designer tracksuit, weighed down by platinum chains, hands loaded with custom diamond rings. He walked in like he owned the terminal, the city, and the state of Florida. And then he saw him. Sitting alone in a secluded leather booth at the far end of the lounge, sipping a glass of premium cognac like a man who had all the time in the world, was Curtis Jackson. 50 Cent. In Miami for a series of executive meetings tied to his television production empire, waiting for a private charter to New York. 2 of his own security guards were seated nearby, calm, alert, and completely unbothered. And for 10 full seconds, 10 seconds that a lounge employee described as the most terrifying silence I've ever heard in my life, the entire room froze. The staff stopped moving. Crystal glasses stopped clinking. Nobody breathed. In every other high society setting on Earth, celebrities of this caliber use something called passive avoidance. You pretend you didn't see them. You look at your phone. You whisper to your assistant. You quietly request a different private suite. But Rick Ross had been humiliated too many times. The lawnmower, the $40,000 wire, the Officer Ricky tag that has now followed him for 17 years, it had all metastasized into something that could not be contained. So Rick Ross did the one thing nobody thought he would ever do. He locked eyes with Curtis Jackson, took a long, slow breath, and walked directly toward the booth. His 3 bodyguards moved with him, forming a wall of muscle. And 50 Cent's security immediately stood up, hands drifting toward the inside of their jackets. But Curtis Jackson calmly raised one hand, signaling them to stand down. And witnesses described the smirk on his face as cold, patient, and mocking. He didn't stand up. He didn't flinch. He watched Rick Ross approach him like a chess player watching an opponent make the exact move he'd been waiting for. Ross stopped 3 feet from the booth, placed both hands on the mahogany, leaned in, and whispered a single line that was accidentally captured by a nearby employee's open earpiece microphone. He said, "You got a lot to say on the internet, Curtis. Why don't you say it to my face on my turf?" And Curtis Jackson didn't blink. He took another slow sip of cognac, looked up, and delivered the quietest, most devastating line I've heard in years. He said, "I'd say it to your face, Ricky, but I didn't think you could afford the entry fee for this lounge. Did you have to spend that 40 grand I sent you just to make it past the gate?" That was the moment the professional air collapsed. Rick Ross let out a roar of pure, uncontrolled fury. He slammed his fist onto the table, shattering the crystal cognac glass. And then he did something no witness in that lounge is ever going to forget. He grabbed Curtis Jackson by the collar of his jacket, and he physically dragged the man out of the booth. Sound of wood splintering. Sound of glass exploding across the floor. The confrontation that followed was chaos. 50 Cent, a man who famously survived 9 gunshot wounds and has never once been described as physically soft, reacted on street reflex. He broke Ross's grip, drove his shoulder into Ross's chest, and shoved the 300-pound mogul backward into a marble partition. The impact echoed through the lounge like a car crash. Tables flipped. Leather chairs went airborne. Both entourages collided in the middle of the room in a violent, frantic tangle. Ross's lead bodyguard, 6'4" and built like a linebacker, charged Curtis Jackson head-on and got intercepted midair by 50 Cent's own security, sending both of them crashing into a rack of champagne bottles and detonating an explosion of glass and gold-label alcohol across the polished floor. This was not entourage theater. This was a raw, chest-to-chest fight between two men who had spent 17 years hating each other from behind screens. Ross was screaming curses, his face twisted with everything he had swallowed for a decade. 50 Cent was throwing short, professional jabs, keeping the larger man from pinning him. And then came the moment that redefines this entire feud forever. As the two of them wrestled near the edge of the lounge's private bar, a heavy black leather designer bag belonging to Rick Ross was knocked off a stool. It hit the polished hardwood, the zipper burst, and the contents spilled across the floor like the reveal of a cinematic third act. And the second everyone in the room saw what came out of that bag, the fight stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Frozen. Every bodyguard, every witness, every combatant went completely still. Because sitting there on the floor, on top of a stack of official-looking financial ledgers, was a red-stamped federal document. Bold, unmistakable letters across the top. DOJ. Active investigation. Cooperation agreement. Let me tell you something. In this culture, in this industry, on these streets, there is no accusation more permanently radioactive than the label of federal informant. There is no comeback from it. There is no rebrand from it. There is no album that survives it. And Curtis Jackson knew that the second his eyes landed on that document, the mocking smirk drained from his face. It was replaced by something colder. Something calculating. He looked at the paperwork. He looked at Rick Ross. And Rick Ross's face had already gone ash gray under the lounge lights. Before Ross's security could react, one of 50 Cent's associates pulled out a phone and snapped a rapid-fire burst of high-resolution photos of the document on the floor. And that is the moment this stopped being a brawl. Because Rick Ross, realizing what had just been captured, went completely unhinged. He roared at his security to seize the phone. And the fight reignited with double the intensity. This was no longer about pride. This was no longer about internet jokes and lawnmowers. This was now a full-scale, high-stakes physical war for control of digital evidence. Ross's bodyguards lunged at 50 Cent's associate and dragged him to the floor in a chokehold. Curtis Jackson launched himself into the pile to protect the phone with his own body. The screaming was heard 3 suites over. Ross was cracking, screaming, delete that right now, or none of you are leaving this airport alive." That's the exact quote. That is what the insider says he heard. And that was the moment airport security finally breached the double-locked VIP doors. 5 armed Miami-Dade officers, 3 K-9 units, weapons drawn, dogs barking, floodlights, and shouted commands. "Step back, hands on your heads, immediately." The presence of law enforcement finally brought the violence to a halt. Both moguls were physically separated and pinned against opposite walls. Their designer clothing was torn. Their jewelry was hanging off them. The lounge looked like a battlefield: shattered crystal, spilled cognac, overturned furniture, 3 destroyed leather chairs, and a champagne rack reduced to gold foil confetti. Because of the extreme wealth and celebrity status of both men, no on-site arrests were made. But the investigation was launched instantly. Curtis Jackson and his team were escorted out under heavy armed guard to prevent a secondary clash on the tarmac. Rick Ross was detained in a private holding room for over an hour of questioning about the altercation and the property damage. But the real damage had already been done. Because within 30 minutes of Curtis Jackson leaving that airport, blurred, redacted images of that red-stamped federal document started circulating on private Discord servers and underground hip-hop Telegram channels. The caption on the first leak was 7 words that broke the internet in half. MMG boss caught with federal paperwork at MIA. Officer Ricky, they wrote, is back on duty. Now here is where the story explodes past anything anyone in the culture has ever seen. Within 6 hours, the hashtag MIA clash and hashtag Officer Ricky had racked up over 8 million posts globally. Twitter, or X, or whatever we're calling it this week, was completely paralyzed. The hip-hop community fractured instantly into 2 furious tribes. On one side, Rick Ross's loyalists, the Frosted Glass Defenders, the MMG diehards, launched a coordinated defense claiming the document was a cheap AI-generated fabrication planted by Curtis Jackson's camp to sabotage Ross's upcoming album. You really think a billionaire boss carries federal paperwork in a gym bag? One viral post read. This is a paid smear campaign because 50's Vegas residency is drying up. That post pulled 50,000 likes in 4 minutes. But on the other side, 50 Cent's digital army was relentless. They flooded every Ross comment section with police badge emojis, handcuff icons, and lawnmower graphics. They pointed to the specific serial numbers visible in the leaked photos, arguing that no AI generator on Earth could replicate the exact administrative watermark of the Southern District of Florida Federal Court. And then came the truly terrifying part. Silence. From the industry itself. Major artists who had built entire careers with Rick Ross features quietly began scrubbing their social media. In a move that sent shockwaves through Atlanta, a prominent Memphis rapper who had been featured on several MMG classics unfollowed Rick Ross across every platform less than 4 hours after the leak surfaced. The message was unmistakable. In this economy, the mere scent of federal cooperation is a career-killing contagion, and nobody was willing to be photographed standing next to it. DJ Academics went live to over 300,000 concurrent viewers, holding up printouts of the leaked images and yelling, "This is the end of an era." If these documents get verified by a federal court reporter, the MMG brand is dead. You cannot rap about kingpins and bulletproof convoys when you've got a red-stamped cooperation file sitting in your carry-on. 50 Cent didn't just win the beef. He might have just retired Rick Ross. Even respected producer Boozy Badass posted a cryptic message that everybody in the culture understood without a single name. The game is backwards. Standing in VIP lounges pretending to be bosses with government paper in their pockets. Real wealth doesn't need a federal shield. Meanwhile, investors in Ross's Southern fast food franchise portfolio started calling for emergency board meetings. This had bled out of hip-hop and into corporate America. Everybody in the industry was being forced to pick a side. And just when the debate hit peak chaos, Rick Ross's legal team fired the shot that changed everything. At exactly 11:45 that night, a corporate law firm representing Rick Ross issued an emergency press release. And this is where I need you to slow down and really listen. Because instead of denying the paperwork, instead of calling it fake, the statement said this. While we categorically deny any physical altercation initiated by our client, William L. Roberts II, at Miami International Airport, we must address the unauthorized distribution of confidential legal documentation. The materials currently circulating online are part of an ongoing, highly sensitive corporate litigation file involving intellectual property rights and asset tracing. Any further distribution of these materials will be met with immediate federal prosecution. Read that again. Slowly. They did not call the papers fake. They did not call it a smear campaign. They called it confidential legal documentation and threatened federal prosecution against anyone who shared it. By moving to protect the document, Rick Ross's own legal team just involuntarily confirmed that it was 100% real. And this is the moment the entire story flips upside down. Because a retired federal court clerk, 20 years of experience managing docket files in the state of Florida, spent the entire night analyzing the serial numbers visible in the leaked photographs. His independent report was published on a highly respected legal blog before sunrise. And what he found is going to change everything you thought you understood about this feud. The file number on that cooperation agreement does not belong to any investigation into Rick Ross.